Okay, this is on macromolecules. There's four main molecules that are in organisms, that are in your body. All right, they're not the only ones, but these four dominate. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So we're going to be talking about each one of these one at a time. So if you remember, there's four atoms that are the most important in biology, or at least the ones that we concentrated on, and they are these: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. And that's because these four atoms make up about 96% of living organisms, right? So it's these four atoms that actually make up the carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So if you take carbohydrates, for example, they're made of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Lipids are made from the same: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins are made from all four of these. Proteins has nitrogen in it, and so do nucleic acids. All right, so these four atoms make up the vast majority of your body, but these four atoms make these four molecules. So most of your body can be, these four molecules make up most of your body. Like carbohydrates, found inside of your muscle, found inside of your liver. Lipids, well, that's fat. You know where your fat is. Proteins, well, that is muscle, bone, parts of your skin. Protein's actually the most diverse. And nucleic acid, that's your DNA and RNA and some of your cell membranes. So let's talk about the first one, carbohydrates. So carbohydrates have some different characteristics, and actually if you look at the word hydrate, so you think of water, so that's H2O. All right, and then the carbo at the beginning of it, and let me try to redo that. Now you know why I don't write on here that much. The carbo at the beginning is carbon, so it's like CH2O. That's a 2. So CH2O, water with carbon attached to it. Hydrate, like water, and then carbo, carbon attached to it. So carbohydrates are always written in this, in this ratio: 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen, C1H2O1. They have a carbonyl group somewhere on the molecule. If you remember, that's like a double bonded oxygen, and they have a few hydroxyls. So let me show you what one looks like. Okay, they look like this. So what you see here is, when we usually look at these molecules, we count it by the number of carbons, and so these are numbered, right, 1 through 6. Right, and then there's the carbonyl right here. I'm going to put a circle around it. Right, there's the carbonyl, and then you can see a few different hydroxyls that I'm attempting to underline here. I managed to underline one, but you get the point. Right, so there's a few hydroxyl groups, and if you were to count the hydrogens and the oxygens, you would see that it makes C6H12O6. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. It's in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. This is actually a molecule of glucose. You don't really necessarily need to memorize how to write glucose. It actually doesn't even look exactly like this. It's more like in a ring form. This is just kind of straightened out to make it easier to see. And this at the bottom is actually like a carbon with hydrogens around it over here. It's just kind of another way to write it. But anyway, ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. There's your carbonyl. It always has a carbonyl group, and then a bunch of hydroxyls. So there's one way that we can delineate carbohydrates. There are simple sugars and complex carbs, and the difference between these are actually in the taste. Complex carbs are like starches, potatoes, rice, things like that that don't taste sweet. Simple sugars taste sweet. So we can further delineate simple sugars into monosaccharides and disaccharides. So the difference between them is that mono means one and di means two. So mono is like the simplest sugar. It's just one molecule, kind of like the glucose one you saw in the last slide. And then if I were to take two glucose molecules or two monosaccharides and put them together, I have a disaccharide. So there are three monosaccharides you're going to need to know. Glucose, which is kind of like blood sugar. You know, when we say blood sugar, we say blood glucose, or another name for it is dextrose. But in any event, that's the most common monosaccharide. Fructose, which is sometimes called fruit sugar, or you could think of like high fructose corn syrup, right? So, you know, it tastes sweeter than glucose, but it's it's a sweeter sugar found in fruit. And then the last one is galactose, and really don't know what to tell you about that one. I've never tasted it before, but it has the word lactose in it. So if you can remember the word lactose and then just put a GA in front of it, right? So these are the three monosaccharides, and I want you to know them. You'll notice, by the way, that they all end with OSE. So if words end with OSE, they are most likely sugars. You also need to know three disaccharides. So they are maltose, which is made from two molecules of glucose put together. If you ever wanted to taste maltose, it's like malted, like a malted shake. Sometimes you can get malted sugar separate, or the inside of Whoppers candy, the part without the chocolate. The next one is sucrose, which is made from one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose. And that is just table sugar. And the last one is lactose, which is made from one molecule of glucose and one molecule of galactose put together, right? And as you know, that is milk sugar. So you've got three monosaccharides and three disaccharides, right? So together, all of these are simple sugars. They all taste sweet. Now on to complex carbs, and there is one kind of complex carbohydrate, and they are called polysaccharides. And polysaccharides are, the name poly means many, so they're made from many monosaccharides put together. Actually, hundreds and thousands of monosaccharides usually put together makes a polysaccharide, and I'm going to give you three different kinds. The first one is starch, which is also called amylose, but starch will do. And starch is how plants store their monosaccharides, right? So the leaves of the plant produce glucose, and all that glucose is stored in the starchy part of the plant, like a potato, or it's stored in like the rice kernel or the corn kernel, whatever it is. I don't know if rice is kernels, but you get the idea, right? So that's how plants store their energy. Animals, including us, we also store our energy as glycogen. So we store glycogen in our liver and our muscles. In fact, that's what we make and break down the most. So our body prefers to use carbohydrates as the main source of energy. So we are constantly taking glucose from our blood and storing it as glycogen. And then when our blood sugar goes low, we're breaking up that glycogen and putting it into the blood to raise our blood sugar. So those are two types of storage. And the next one is an example of using a polysaccharide for structure. Cellulose, which is commonly known as fiber. Plants, their cells have these really strong walls around them, and they're kind of packed in there like bricks. Here, let me show you what it looks like. Man, there were no slides to show you. This is the only one I could find. and it kind of sucks, but let's see. Alright, so these little circles are the nucleus of each cell, and you can see like the cell wall. They looks like kind of like a bunch of squares in here, right? So like, you know, there's one here and there's one here, right? So that's kind of how, this is like an onion root tip, kind of all I can find. I mean, forget about all these other words for right now. But that's how they're kind of laid out, right? So they've got these hard, these are actually hard. This is what wood's made out of, right? So these are hard cell walls. They make up, you know, that's what cellulose is. Plants use that to kind of give itself structure because it doesn't have a skeleton. And for us, when we kind of crunch fruits and vegetables, that's what we're doing. We're breaking those cell walls, and so they become like little fibers that, you know, it's common dietary fiber. So those are carbohydrates. Next, we're going to move on to lipids. Okay, so the next class of macromolecules are lipids, and lipids are essentially long hydrocarbons. So I'll show you a picture of one. And usually on one side there is a carboxyl group. Anyway, let me put a photo of one on here. Man, again, slim pickings as far as pictures go, but these are two fatty acid chains. So just look at this one up here on top, and this is a carboxyl group, and then that's it. It's a long hydrocarbon. So these are not water soluble, right? So lipids by their nature are, you know, tend to not be water soluble. So actually, since we're on this one, look down at this one. You notice that it's different in a couple of ways. One way that it's bent, and another way you see this equal sign here. It's a double covalent bond. This one doesn't have any. So if you look at carbon, carbon can make only four bonds. 1, 2, I already screwed that up. 1, 2, 3. Wow. This isn't right. Wow, that's great. What a bad example. Even the example's wrong. This hydrogen right here is supposed to be missing. That's what screwed me up. So, horrible example, but let's stay with this one up here. That's what they look like. They're really easy to see. Just really long hydrocarbons. And usually, the ones we deal with are about 18 carbons long. I'm not going to count this, but I'm just going to assume that it's 18. And so there's more than one kind of lipid, but we're going to talk about two different kinds. Triglycerides and phospholipids. So triglycerides are the most common, dietary fat. There's two main kinds, saturated fats and also unsaturated. And there are a few key differences between them. The first being that saturated fats tend to come from animals, and they tend to be solid at room temperature. So think of butter. At room temperature, butter is solid, right? And butter comes from an animal. Unsaturated fats tend to be liquid at room temperature. So and they tend to come from plants. So think of all the oils like olive oil, canola, peanut oil, things like that, right? And then there's one more key difference. So let me pull up a photo here. Okay, here's an unsaturated fat. So the key difference between saturated and unsaturated is saturated fat would have hydrogens here and here and here. It would be saturated with hydrogens. Everywhere that there could be a hydrogen, there would be. Unsaturated fats have one or more of these double bonds. And whenever you have a double bond, you're going to be missing hydrogens in here. So if you look at this carbon, this was the one that we just looked at that was all screwed up. This one's correct. So if you look at this carbon and look at the tip of the arrow, there's one bond, there's the second bond, 3 and 4 right there. So there can't be a fifth bond here. So this carbon had to let the hydrogen go. Same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4. can't have this fifth one. So there's a space here. Same thing here, same thing here. There doesn't have to be, 3 spaces. There could be just one. So, but it's unsaturated. And let me show you what saturated fats look like. So this is a saturated up on top, and it looks a lot different from this, but it's the same idea. Carbons, but here it's surrounded by hydrogens. It's not as long as this one, but the point is that there's no double bonds here, and there's no hydrogens missing. You'll also notice, look, here's a carboxyl group here, and on here it's on the other side, right? So it doesn't matter what side it's on, but we call this the alpha end, and we call this the omega end. So in this case, this is the alpha, and this is the omega. So this kind of tells you something else. I look at the omega end, and I'll count in 1, 2, 3 carbons. There's my opening. So this is an omega-3 fatty acid. Right, so that's how you could tell what omega-3 versus omega-6 is. Where's the first opening? But anyway, saturated, it's saturated with hydrogens. Unsaturated, there's spaces in here. So here's what a triglyceride typically looks like. It looks something like this. Right, so the word tri means 3. 3 fatty acid chains. Here's one, here's another one, and here's another one. Right? So there's 3 fatty acid chains. These are all saturated, by the way. And it's attached to this molecule of glycerol. So triglyceride, coming from glycerol. So that's what it looks like. In this case, it's kind of like a backwards letter E. It could be flipped around to look like a letter E, but it's 3 fatty acid chains attached to a molecule of glycerol. If this was an unsaturated fatty acid, you would find, openings in different places, right? It would be easy to see, right? So these are 3 fatty acid chains attached to a molecule of glycerol. Now let's look at the next type of lipid. Okay, this is called a phospholipid. So let's see how this is different. First things first, you can ignore this part of the molecule. Alright, this is glycerol. I'm going to kind of circle it. So we have 2 fatty acid chains. Here's one. Here's another fatty acid chain. And both of them are attached to this molecule of glycerol. So a triglyceride would be 3. 1, 2. There'd be another one here. But in this case, there isn't. In this case, it's a phosphate group. So instead of being 3 fatty acid chains, there's only 2. And right here is a phosphate group. So the weird thing about this molecule is, this is a lipid. It does not mix with water. It's what we call hydrophobic. Afraid of water, hydrophobic. This is what we call hydrophilic. It likes water. So you have a molecule that part of it likes water and part of the same molecule does not like water. And that's what phospholipids are. So this is kind of like the shorthand way of drawing it. They're showing the hydrophilic head. Hydrophilic means to like water. And then the hydrophobic tails right here. So in biology, you're going to see this a lot. Actually, you're going to see it like this. So these are two layers of phospholipids. I'm putting the pointer right in the middle, like I'm splitting them, right? So here's one layer of phospholipids, and here's another layer. Pretend this is all inside the cell, and pretend this is all outside the cell. So there's 2 layers of phospholipids turned in on each other. The parts that like water are facing inside the cell, and they're facing outside the cell. Because everything in your cells and everything out of your cells are water-based. But this middle part here that's in green is hydrophobic, meaning that it's like a lipid. It's hydrophobic. It's not water soluble. So whereas plant cells are kind of like crunchy because they have these hard cell walls. We don't have cell walls. We have, our cell walls are kind of made, it's like a bubble. It's really kind of like that. A bubble is kind of like a soapy membrane, right? And that's kind of what our cells are. They're not too difficult to break, at least not the average cell. But anyway, our cells are made from a phospholipid bilayer, which is kind of like this molecule above us, right? And another thing you could do with it is, this is kind of like dish soap, right? Dish soap is kind of like a phospholipid. This part of the molecule grabs onto that grease, that stubborn baked on grease. This part of the molecule grabs onto the water. And so a phospholipid can be used to mix oil and water. And in the food industry, it's used like a common type of phospholipid in the food industry is lecithin. So that is lecithin, like when you're making, I don't know, brownies or large batches of cookies on an industrial scale, you have to mix the water and the oil components, right? So they use that. If you look on a bag of baked goods, you're likely to see it in the ingredients on the food label. So this is running way long, so let's move to the next one, proteins. So proteins are probably the most diverse of these molecules. And in our body, proteins have tons of functions. And so I'm going to write down just a few examples now. So your muscle, your hair, your fingernails, antibodies, hormones, enzymes, which make everything happen, pigment that colors your skin or your eyes, keratin, which waterproofs your skin, collagen fibers, which gets the foundation of your bones and many other parts of your body. So, and there's actually thousands of different proteins in your body. So this is just a few examples of them. And proteins are made from amino acids. So let's look at what an amino acid looks like. They look like this. So what you see on one side is a carboxyl group, carboxylic acid, and what you see on the other side is an amino group, amino acid. The R just means it's like an X, right? It means variable. So there's 20 different amino acids. They all look like this except for the R. The R is different. So when I put two or more of these amino acids together, I have a protein. So I view proteins like a chain, and the amino acids are like the links. Okay, I guess this is a good example of what proteins look like. Just a mess, right? It looks like all those computer cables and chargers that you have in that drawer, and it's all just like a big knotted mess. That's what it's like. When you look at some kind of knot and you're like, forget it, I'm just going to buy a new set of headphones, because you're never going to get that thing apart, right? That's what proteins look like, and the majority of them at least. And so the shape of these proteins, it's very important. If you just take like this little part over here and you just change it a little bit, move it down a little bit, this whole protein is useless. It does not work anymore. So the shape of the protein is very important. So protein structure, very important. The sequence of amino acids is also very important. So this is an example of someone with sickle cell anemia, and so these blood cells here are not round. It's actually called like biconcave, but they're round, and then here they're not. So these don't carry oxygen as well, and these get stuck in your capillaries. And so the protein that is responsible for the shape of these cells is like around 450, 500 amino acids long. And out of all of those, just number 6 is different. So imagine a chain made of 500 links, and just one of the links is different, and that's enough to change the shape. So the sequence or the order that you put these amino acids in is very important. If it's not in the right order, your body doesn't accept it, right? It's a mutation. So how does the body know what order to put these amino acids? Well, that's in your DNA, and so that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, nucleic acids we commonly know as DNA and RNA, and the words, DNA stands for deoxyribose, which you do not necessarily need to memorize, nucleic acid, right, DNA, and then RNA is ribose nucleic acid. And so these are both involved with, this is all part of your genetics, part of your genes, your chromosomes, right? So it's in the nucleus, the middle of your cell, you find DNA and to some extent RNA, right? And so DNA and RNA is going to determine what order those amino acids go in. But besides this, there are a couple other molecules. Actually, come to think of it, we're only going to talk about one more, which is called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And ATP is like the energy currency of your body, and that's going to be another, that's another chapter. So let's look at a nucleic acid. Okay, so this is kind of a molecule of DNA. So first of all, there's two strands here. So it kind of looks like a ladder, right? And this part right here is where you place your hands and your feet. And then this part right here, these are the two supporting parts of it. But what I want to show you is, I'm going to try to circle one right there. Okay, this is called a nucleotide, and a nucleotide is made up of 3 parts. Alright, so the first part is a sugar, the second part is a phosphate, so it alternates sugar, phosphate, right? And then the third part, so you have a sugar, a phosphate, and then these letters right here, like the C, G, A, T, that's a base, or sometimes they call it a nitrogen base. So there's 3 parts to a nucleotide: a sugar, a phosphate, and a base. That's what a nucleotide is. So this is DNA, and the difference between DNA and RNA, actually that's a whole other chapter, right? But what's important about this molecule is right here, the C, C, G, A, T. This thing continues on millions and billions of times, right? And so these nitrogen bases, which at least for me, I'm not going to make you memorize the names, but this is called cytosine. But anyway, your body reads 3 of these at a time. Your cells read 3 of these at a time. So C, C, G. Then your body knows that that's a code for a certain type of amino acid. And then you go on. A, T, whatever the next one is. A. Right? That's another code for another type of amino acid. So I guess the question is, what makes you, uniquely you? And the answer is proteins. Well, how does your body know which proteins to make? Well, it, puts certain amino acids together. The reason it knows what amino acids to put together is because of the nitrogen bases. So let me see if I can just show you an example. No, I can't find a photo. So, the other good news for you is I'm down to about 30 seconds left. There is a limit on these. So anyway, this is kind of what it looks like. RNA is half of this, right? So RNA is just one side. It's one strand. DNA is 2 strands. And again, there's a whole chapter on DNA and RNA, and the chapter on ATP will come in to metabolism. So there is a long rundown of macromolecules, but I've really only just touched on it.